The red moon hung low over the jungle, casting a blood-colored light on the village of Thrall. Drums echoed in the cold night. Slow and deep, like a heartbeat of fear, the villagers walked in silence, faces covered, heads down, carrying torches that hissed in the damp air. At the center of them, a young alien girl was dragged with chains on her wrists and ankles. Her name was Lyra, and tonight she was the sacrifice. She had stopped screaming hours ago, her voice gone, her eyes empty. She had known this day would come. Every 5 years, the village offered a life to the beast in the jungle. They called it the curse that breathes. No one had ever seen it. And lived, the elders said it had wings made of bone and a face full of eyes. Now Lyra was tied to the black stone altar just outside the jungle. The vines around the stone looked like they were alive, pulsing with some evil breath. Torches were planted in a circle, and the villagers slowly backed away. One elder raised his hand, speaking in a broken chant. "Forgive us, take this soul. Spare our homes." Then they left her there alone. Lyra looked up at the sky, her arms spread out. Chains locked to the altar stone, the red moon stared down, cold and cruel. She closed her eyes and whispered her last thoughts. But then she heard something strange. Not a roar, not a growl, but a loud snap, like metal breaking. She opened her eyes and gasped. A glowing red flare lit up the jungle edge, burning like fire against the dark, and out of the trees came a tall figure, humanoid, limping, holding something sharp in his hand. A human. Lyra had never seen one before, only heard stories. He wore torn armor, covered in dirt and blood, but his eyes burned with focus. The flare dropped at his feet, bathing the altar in red light. He ran to her, knelt beside the stone, and tried to break the chain with his blade. "Don't move," he said firmly. Though Lyra didn't understand his words, the chain resisted. Sparks flew. The metal groaned in the distance. Something screamed. It was the sound of a monster waking, echoing through the jungle trees. The human looked up sharply, sweat running down his face. He tried harder, gritting his teeth, slamming the knife again and again against the chain. Finally it broke. He grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her up. She stumbled, weak, confused, but he held her steady. Another roar came, closer this time. The human didn't wait. He grabbed her hand and ran into the jungle. Behind them, the torches blew out one by one, as if the wind itself was afraid. Branches snapped under their feet. Leaves slapped their faces. Roots tried to trip them, but the human kept going, his grip never letting her fall. Lyra kept looking back, expecting to see glowing eyes or shadowed wings, but the jungle was too thick, too dark. They didn't speak. She didn't know his name. He didn't know hers, but in that moment, her life was no longer hers to give. It was his to protect, and he had chosen to protect it. When they finally stopped, they were far from the altar. Deep in the wild heart of the jungle, the human leaned against a tree, breathing hard. Lyra stood a few steps away, still trying to understand what had just happened. He looked at her, then reached into a pouch and handed her a small flask. She sniffed. It then took a small sip. It burned her throat but warmed her from the inside. The human smiled slightly, then sat down, rubbing his leg. It was bleeding badly. She stepped forward slowly, pointing to the wound, then to the herbs growing nearby. He nodded, unsure, but let her try. Her fingers touched his skin lightly, wrapping leaves with care. She had been raised to fear humans, to believe they were heartless invaders. But this one had stepped into the circle of death. For her, the wind howled through the trees. The jungle was still not safe. But under that red moon, chained no longer, Lyra took her first free breath, and for the first time in her life, she felt like someone had seen her as more than just a sacrifice. She was still afraid, but now she was not alone. Lyra followed behind him. her bare feet slipping on the damp roots and soft ground. But the human didn't let go of her hand. He was limping, bleeding, and breathing hard, but he moved fast through. The alien jungle, the trees here were thicker, their leaves glowing faintly with blue light. And strange insects floated like sparks in the air. Somewhere far behind them, the beast was still hunting. She could feel it. The human stopped for a moment and listened, his head turning slightly. Eyes narrowed, he pointed ahead to where the trees grew around a large, fallen trunk covered in moss. Lyra didn't understand his words, but she nodded and helped him climb over it. Her legs were weak, but something inside her kept moving, like her body already trusted him more than her own mind did. They kept going, deeper into the forest. The jungle sounds changed. Frogs croaked in deep, metallic tones, and the wind carried whispers that sounded like voices. She had never been here before. No one came this far. No one survived. The human finally stopped beside a tall cliff wall where vines hung low. He pushed them aside and revealed a small gap in the rock, just wide enough for them to crawl through without waiting. He dropped to his knees and entered first. Lyra hesitated, glancing behind her into the dark jungle, then followed him into the crack in the stone. Inside, it was cool and quiet. The rock walls were damp and smelled like old soil. The space opened into a hidden cave. Not big, but safe. Glowing mushrooms clung to the walls, casting soft light across the ground. The human sat down heavily, pulling off a part of his armor. His leg was worse now, bleeding more than before. Lyra knelt beside him and touched his wound gently. He winced but didn't push her away. She looked around and found a few thick leaves and some purple moss growing along the wall. She tore the moss and pressed it onto the cut, wrapping the leaves tightly around it. The human watched her, confused, surprised, maybe even grateful. She didn't speak, didn't smile. She just worked, her fingers moving carefully. She didn't know what she was doing exactly, but it felt right. He pointed at himself and said one word. Slowly, Jace. She blinked, not understanding at first. He pointed again and repeated it. Jace. She stared at him for a long moment, then whispered her own name. Lyra. His lips curved into a soft smile, tired but genuine. Then he leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. She sat beside him, her back to the stone, watching the cave entrance. Her heart was still racing, her body still trembling, but for the first time in her life, someone had called her. Something other than sacrifice. Outside, the jungle screamed again. The beast was still searching, but Lyra didn't move. She looked at Jace's face, the scar on his cheek, the dirt on his skin. He had no reason to save her, no reward, no duty. And yet, here he was. She didn't know why, but in the silence of the cave. As her eyes grew heavy and her head rested on her knees, she whispered his name softly to herself, as if saying it would keep the fear away, as if he was more than just a man, as if he was hope, and outside, under the blood-red moon. The monster growled once more, but it did not find them, not yet. Jace opened his eyes slowly in the dim light of the cave. The soft glow of mushrooms painted strange shapes on the walls. Lyra was already awake, sitting close by, her eyes watching him carefully. She reached into her small bag and pulled out a strange, glowing herb. Its light pulsed gently, like a heartbeat. She crushed the leaves between her fingers and whispered words she had learned long ago. Jace winced as she pressed the cold paste onto his wound. It stung, but his breathing slowed, and the pain seemed to ease. Neither of them spoke much, but the silence was not empty. It was filled with questions that neither dared to ask. Lyra's mind raced. Why had this human saved her? And Jace wondered, what was this girl's story that made her so important? Outside, the jungle was alive with noise, the call of strange animals, the rustle of leaves. But inside the cave, time felt frozen. Lyra reached out hesitantly and touched Jace's hand. Her skin was cool and soft, different from the rough scales she was used to. He looked at her, surprise in his eyes. But he did not pull away. Suddenly, a sound broke the stillness, faint crackling. Like footsteps approaching, Jace stiffened, gripping a small knife at his side. Lyra's eyes widened, fear flashing across her face. The cave's entrance shifted as a shadow moved. But it was not the monster. It was a small alien creature. Thin and trembling, it looked at them with wide, fearful eyes, then whispered in a voice barely heard. "Danger." Jace nodded, his senses sharp. They both knew they had little time. The monster was closer than before. They needed to move again. Lyra helped Jace to his feet, steadying him as they stepped into the fading light of the cave. As they moved through the thick jungle, Lyra's thoughts turned to her village. The people who had chosen her for sacrifice, how easily they had given her away. But now, with this human beside her, she felt a strange new strength, a feeling. She had never known hope. Jace looked ahead, eyes scanning the shadows. He knew this jungle was unforgiving, but he would fight to keep her alive, no matter what came next. Jace's breath came fast as he stood in the open clearing. The jungle around them was silent, too silent. Then, without warning, the monster appeared, crashing through the trees like a storm. Its massive claws tore at the earth, and its glowing eyes locked onto them. Lyra froze for a moment, fear gripping her heart. But Jace stepped forward without hesitation, holding his glowing knife tight. The beast roared, shaking the ground, its voice full of anger and hunger. Jace shouted at Lyra to run, but she stood her ground. She remembered the strength inside her, the fire that had not yet died. The monster lunged, and Jace dodged quickly, slashing at its thick skin. But the claws caught him, knocking him to the ground, pain exploding in his side. Lyra screamed and rushed forward, grabbing a heavy stick. She swung with all her might, hitting the monster's face. The beast howled in surprise and pain. Jace used the moment to rise, blood dripping from his wounds. He looked at Lyra, eyes filled with both fear and trust. Then the monster struck again, faster this time. Jace barely blocked the blow. The world around them blurred with movement and noise. But Lyra saw something strange, an opening near the monster's neck. She pointed, yelling the only word she knew in his language, "Strike." Jace understood, and with a burst of strength, he drove his knife into the soft flesh. The monster bled, roaring louder than before. Shaking the trees, it staggered back. Hurt but not defeated, Jace and Lyra moved together, fighting side by side, neither willing to give up. The battle was far from over. But something had changed. They were no longer just hunter and hunted. They were allies, bound by fight and fate. And as the moon watched silently above, the jungle held its breath. Jace stumbled back from the monster's last blow, his strength fading fast, his wound burned fiercely. And the jungle seemed to close in around him. Then, in the corner of the cave they had passed earlier, something caught his eye, an ancient relic, half buried in the moss, glowing faintly with blue light. With the last of his power, he crawled towards it, fingers trembling. As he touched the relic, a surge of energy shot through his body. The relic pulsed and hummed, lighting up like a star reborn. Jace's eyes widened in shock. He felt strength return, stronger than before. Power filled his hands and legs, and the pain in his side dulled. Lyra watched, amazed and hopeful. The human who had saved her was changing before her eyes. He stood, tall, holding the relic like a weapon, its light reflecting in his determined gaze, without hesitation. Jace charged at the monster again. This time, his movements were sharp and confident. The beast snarled. Sensing the shift in power, Jace swung the relic like a blade, and the air around it shimmered. With one powerful strike, He cut through the monster's thick hide. The creature howled in pain and fury. Stumbling backwards, Lyra cheered quietly, her heart pounding. The monster tried to fight back, but Jace was faster, stronger, with every strike. The relic's light grew brighter. Finally, with a roar that shook the jungle, the beast fell to the ground. Still, it breathed heavy. Eyes burning with final rage, Jace stood over the fallen monster, chest heaving. He looked down at Lyra and gave a tired but victorious smile. She smiled back, tears in her eyes. They had survived, but their journey was far from over. The jungle fell silent after the beast's roar faded. Jace collapsed to the ground, breathing shallow and weak. Lyra rushed to his side, her hands trembling as she checked his wounds. Blood soaked the relic in his grip, and his eyes flickered like a dying star. She pressed her palm gently to his chest, whispering words she did not understand. Her heart pounded loudly in the quiet cave. Fear mixing with hope, the villagers' chants echoed faintly in her mind. A reminder of the sacrifice she was meant to be, but now she could not let him die. Not after all he had done. Hours passed like moments, the moon traveling slowly across the sky. Lyra stayed awake, never leaving his side. Her fingers found his hand and held it tightly, as if her strength could flow into him. Outside, the jungle creatures howled, but the cave was a small world of stillness and waiting. At dawn, footsteps echoed near the cave entrance. The villagers had come searching, their faces hard and full of questions. They stopped, seeing the monster dead and the human lying weak. Whispers spread Lyra was no longer just a sacrifice. She was a survivor, and the man beside her was more than a stranger. One elder stepped forward, eyes wide with shock and respect. He bowed his head, signaling a new beginning for Lyra and her people. But Lyra only cared about one thing: Jace's. Slow, painful breath, she leaned closer, pressing her forehead against his, and whispered softly, "Wake up." Days passed slowly in the quiet cave. Jace's breathing grew steady, and his eyes finally opened. Lyra was sitting beside him, her face soft with hope and worry when he looked at her. A smile broke across his tired lips. She reached out and took his hand. "No longer a prisoner," she whispered. "No longer a sacrifice." Jace tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he squeezed her hand gently. He understood without words. Outside, the village was changing. The people who once feared her now bowed with respect. Lyra was no longer just a girl chosen by the moon. She was a symbol of hope and survival. Together, they stepped into the light of a new day, bound not by chains or fear, but by the strength they found in each other. Jace looked at Lyra and said softly, "I was chosen to save you, but you saved me too." Lyra smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "Not a sacrifice," she said, "but a beginning." And under the warm sun, two souls, once strangers, now bound by heart and fate, walked forward, ready to face whatever came next.